Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. I am so thrilled today to welcome Mark Herschberg. I don't even remember exactly when we met, but we've had conversations over at least a year, and it's such a privilege to have you on the show. I'm going to let everybody know we are going to have him back on because there's so much amazing stuff that Mark can share with our audience that not only you need to know, but I want to learn as well. Mark, you're the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You, creator of the Brain Bump app. You also have spent much of your career developing and launching ventures at startups, Fortune 500, and also in academia. What do you not do? You also have been a former professional ballroom dancer. I mean, oh my gosh, do you sleep?
I just keep busy and like to do a lot of different things. There's plenty more I wish I had time for.
Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So let's talk about your career first. How did you get into, did academia come first, or did your work with startups and venture capital come first?
Little of column A, little of column B. When I graduated MIT with my master's degree, I was a little hesitant to step out into the real world. So my very first job after graduating was as research staff at MIT, working for a professor who was taking, I don't know how he funded it. He took this idea we were working on at MIT and said, we're going to turn this into a startup company. So it was a little of each. Now, he kept talking about this thing called a business plan. And when I heard about it, I said, well, this sounds important. And I didn't buy into the business model. So I didn't go along to that company. I found a different startup company. We didn't even use the term startup back then. This was mid-90s. But I found this other company. I started working for them. And so got into the startup side, the venture capital side, stuff that I really love doing. But very quickly, I found there were not the skills that I was looking for in the people I was hiring. And that led me back into academia, where we put together the program I helped create at MIT, where I've been teaching for 20 plus years. And I did spend a year working at Harvard Business School with some finance professors developing one of their programs. So it's been back and forth.
Amazing. And you talk a lot about career, the future of work. You also know a lot about lead gen marketing and the future of media. So for this show, I really want to get into that. And I think, I want to talk about Brain Bump, how you decided to start that app, what it's about. But then what else are you seeing? I told you now I'm also a professor at USC. And I'm teaching digital media, digital marketing, the future of PR, branding, all these different things. And it's changing so fast that it's interesting because I'll see that, the articles that we're asking these students to read are pre-pandemic and AI is changing every day. So how do we keep on top of this? And what do you see as the future of media?
Great question. It's funny. I was talking to someone at one of the leading AI companies. I'm not going to say their name, but a name you've heard of. And he was saying it doesn't even make sense for people to go get a PhD at the moment. I think this will change in the future because the research that they're doing in universities is behind what's happening at these AI companies. It's like by the time you spend 3 to 5 years doing your PhD, you're out of date with the cutting edge at the moment.
Wow.
And let's tie that into the context before we get into the specifics, just the context as we look at what's going to be happening in the world going forward. Now, I am a target of salespeople because I have a C-level title. I work as a CTO, CPO, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Product Officer at startups. And so everyone goes, oh, that's a guy with authority and money, and he's the guy I want to sell to. I get spam all day long. I don't just mean Nigerian princes. I mean handwritten, put that in quotes, handwritten spam from salespeople just trying to hit me up to buy things. That is going to accelerate because certainly now we can generate custom messages for each person. They can say, oh, look at this web page and now take my standard sales template and throw in some buzzwords from his or her website. And we're just going to see more of this. And of course, automating tools will continue to grow. So we're going to get so much more in terms of cold pitches that we need to rely more on branding. And by the way, I hate cold pitches. I hate people whose life is nothing more than just doing cold calling.
Yeah.
Is that really the best you can do with your life?
Oh my gosh, it's the worst. I have, VP level, but every day I get so many spam emails about, hey, are you looking for a new software company? Do you need this? Do you need that? You didn't even look at our website. Even cleaning companies. I'm like, we are a completely virtual company and have been for 21 years. We don't have an office it's just ridiculous that people are not doing their research. And so it's making me feel, to your point, less invested in those. And I'm just like, spam, spam, spam. Do I need to take my email address off of LinkedIn? I'm sure it's all over the place, right? So it's kind of hard to remove that contact information. We're still going to get that. But how do we maneuver around those tools and still make email marketing effective and other forms of lead gen and marketing that we need to do for our companies and for our clients?
Great question. Since we can't just spam people in the future, we honestly shouldn't be doing it today. We need to change the nature of the relationship. And it goes to, you need to give before you get. Now, this is networking 101. It's relationship building, give before you get. And it really kills me because salespeople claim, oh, it's all about networking. Of course, I'm a salesperson networking, but they are so transactional. The reality is most of the salespeople, they tell me, oh, yeah, I want a relationship with you. But the moment the contract is signed, I probably will never see them again until the contract's up for renewal.
Yeah.
Now, they try to pretend it's about a relationship because when you sit down to the meeting, they say, oh, how are you doing? And where do you grow up? Or they'll find something in common, try to have that small talk to feel like they're building a relationship, but it's shallow and it doesn't really build a relationship. On the other hand, if they showed up and said, here's something of value for you. Now, I get the same as you. I get all those companies trying to sell me offshore services, or I get recruiters trying to place people with me. Those are, I'd say, 50% of the outreach I get is one of those two categories. And they're a dime a dozen. But if they showed up and said, look, I know you get lots of this. Here is our analysis of the market. Here's what we're seeing in terms of rates, like what you should be paying. And maybe you're paying below that or at that and you're happy and great. And I'm glad we could help make you feel more confident. By the way, if you ever need help in the future, here's my number. We're going to show up and offer value and not just take. Because what happens when we spam, we're going to move off of just spam and cold calling later in this episode. But when you're spamming, what you're saying is, I don't want to invest the time in learning what's important to you. I'd rather spend the fraction of a second to click send again or have my automated system do it and let you waste your time deciding if this is worthwhile or not. And so it's insulting your recipient. But when you show up and say, I want to help you, the recipient, and I will jump through some hoops and give you something of value to you, that's the right way to start a relationship, which can lead to sales.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. The personalization factor. Not that we just want to talk about lead gen this whole time, but when we look at lead gen, right? And you think about, okay, you have to nurture the relationship and 8 to 12 emails, but so many times those sequences aren't personal. They're just a drip sequence that you've put together. It's generic. It's the same for everybody. And I think also with the fact that third-party cookies are going to be going away, that first-party relationship that customers and brands have is going to be even more important. So that personalization aspect is going to become more important. Even if it's not on a one-to-one basis, still being able to use the information that you have on a customer, like their birthday, making sure that you're sending a birthday message, that you have a special offer, things that I think I've heard a lot of companies collect all this information, but don't really use it effectively.
That's right. And we can follow on to this idea to see in other similar mistakes we make with branding.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm not a fan of social media or a lot of email marketing, because it's the same thing. It's impersonal. And both of those tend to be ordered chronologically. You talked about drip campaigns. So when you show up, you go, okay, for the next 3 months, here are the emails we're going to send. Every week, here's the email, and it's preset what they're doing. Maybe there's a slight change if you click some link and they move you to a new marketing segment. But otherwise, it's just we treat you all the same. Social media, it's the same thing. I work with lots of people who are experts and coaches and thought leaders. And here's the thing, we put something out on social media, and this applies to all sorts of brands as well. You say, hey, here's my thought of the day on whatever your expertise is, let's say leadership. And someone might be thinking, yeah, that's really great, but right now my issue isn't leadership. My issue is finding more customers, hiring more people, building my brand. It's not that your leadership advice is bad. It's just not relevant to me today. So they ignore that post on social media, or they ignore, probably delete that email. And so our branding approach is very much throw it against the wall, see what sticks. We throw it, certain number of people see our posts or open our emails, and then a smaller percentage of them say that was helpful, and even smaller percentage of them click through or take the next step.
Yeah.
But if we can invert this from this push concept of media to a pull concept, where you say, I don't want leadership ideas right now. I want hiring ideas or closing sales or whatever your need is. Pull that to me. That's what I need. Because in 6 months, when then I need leadership, I'm not going to go look back and see what were your old social media posts. I want to say, okay, now I'm going to turn the light on to say, now send me the leadership stuff. I'm going to tell you what's relevant. Don't bother me when it's not relevant. You're going to have fewer touch points with me, but those touch points are all going to be relevant. Now, of course, no one's checking into websites saying, hey, here's what's happening right now.
Right.
But you can have mechanisms to understand what people are looking for and deliver that relevant content. Again, fewer touch points, but they are going to land every time.
I like that. So what are some of the ways that people can incorporate that?
Here's a very simple way you can do it. I do this on the blog on my Career Toolkit website, which is the blog is ordered chronologically, and that's just because that's how blogs are set up. But because my content's evergreen, my leadership advice from last year,
still
it's not different today, it still applies. So you can not only find things chronologically, but you can go by topic. And you can say, I want to learn about leadership or about ethics or about networking. And now you're getting just relevant content to that need.
Nice.
Very simple thing you can do with the content on your website. Just put in tags and categories, and already you're providing a different path for people to engage. Now, there's many more advanced things we can do, and we have to build out systems and tools for that. I have the app to do that, but it's all in the same vein of letting people at low cost being effort, navigate through to get what's most relevant to them. And they're sharing information with you about what they want.
Yeah. So you just teased out your app with some of those tools. So do you want to talk about that right here? Because everything you're saying syncs up to exactly the way I've been thinking about, like my podcast, for instance, right? I have people come on and talk about a number of subjects, but I don't have all the time in the day to make sure that I've categorized them on my website, which is something that I'm future planning, so that, you know, exactly what you're talking about, so that people can find what they need at the moment and don't just have to search through hundreds of episodes to find it.
So let's take the podcast as another example, because I'm sure you have great episodes from a year ago, 2 years ago, that our listeners today say, oh, that would be so helpful, but they don't want to scroll through 200 episodes to say, where's that needle in the haystack? And I found this was a problem. The same thing with my book. One of the things I realized when I wrote a book, and this comes from teaching, something we both do, is, of course, students, as soon as they walk out of the classroom, especially at the end of the semester, all the information disappears. It goes poof. And how many times do we listen to a podcast to say, wow, this is what I want to learn, but how much do you remember 2 days later?
Yeah.
I feel 99% of it. When I read a book, and now I've just invested 6 or 8 hours reading a book, I forget that a week or two later. So I recognized I wanted to help people retain what they got, because you're investing all this time, whether it's 40 minutes in a podcast or 8 hours in a book, you want to get something out of it. The other challenge is that content is typically not organized contextually. Where you read information isn't where you need information.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. In my book, I have networking tips. Where do you read that? Sitting at home. Where do you need it? 2 months later, as you're walking into the conference.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if you had those tips right then and there before you walked into the room? So I recognize there's a challenge that people were not retaining information and didn't have access to the information when they needed it. I was certain when I came up with the idea, I said, someone must have solved this problem. I'll just license their tool. It did not exist. So I created the Brain Bump app, and it is based on this challenge. How do we help people remember and retrieve what they need when they need it? So it's a cross between a summary app, a flashcard app, and a daily affirmation app.
Ooh, okay.
People take the key ideas from their content. Now, the content might be a book, but could be a podcast, a blog, a class, a talk. You take the key ideas and you put the content creator, the author, the podcaster, will put these ideas into the app as little tips. So you have a whole bunch of tip cards. My book, I've got about 400 tips. Podcast, you'll typically have 1 or 2 kind of key takeaways, the type of thing probably already sharing on social media, right? There's that
exactly
30-second
top 3 things you're going to learn in this episode. Yeah.
You got that, and then you put into the app your users when they download your content. So they go and say, oh, I'm reading this book, or I want to check out this podcast. It's all completely free. The app is free. They can download your tips for free. And the tips are organized by topic.
Nice.
So when someone is about to go into that conference, if they've got my app and they happen to have my book as one of the things they select, and you can select as much as you want, they say, oh, I want those networking tips in seconds with just a few clicks. They pull up there are the networking tips and just flip right through it. So it's there. It's awesome. Top of mind right where they need it. They don't have to look at the negotiation tips or the career plan tips because you selected by category. You've pulled what's relevant to you for when and where you are. Now, there's a second mode, which is spaced repetition. We know spaced repetition is how people learn things. Spaced repetition, fancy word for seeing something over and over. It's why we opened the book and looked at our notes again a couple times before the test, or we made flashcards.
Yeah.
So with the spaced repetition, each of the tips that you've added to your app, you can set a daily reminder. So once a day at a time you set, you get a little pop-up. You don't even have to open the app, because who wants to have to open an app every day? That's way too much work. If you get a little notice, it might be, I'm leading a team for a first time. So 9 a.m. every day, Monday through Friday, I want to get a management tip that pops up 9 a.m. and go, oh, right, good tip. Great. I'll have to remember that. Swipe. Done. 2 seconds a day, you get something that is relevant to you, and it helps you remember what you heard on the podcast or read in the book.
Nice.
Now, this is the benefit to the app user, but let's look at it from a branding standpoint. If you don't know authors, the thing you should know, they do not make money from selling books.
Right.
If you think you're writing a book, don't think you're going to make lots of money from it. I didn't realize this. Now, I wrote my book just because I want to help people. I'm not trying to sell coaching services or anything else. But for many people, the book is lead gen. How they get to know you. Podcasts, they can be lead gen. Your blog post, lead gen. And it's how people get familiar with you and your content and your work. But again, the problem is you put out a podcast episode or a blog post and someone says, not relevant right now. So here you're taking your evergreen content and you're surfacing it when and where it's relevant to your audience. So now every day your audience, when they get that little pop-up or pull up, because they say, right now, this is what I need, they say, wow, this is so relevant. This is so helpful for me. And they've got information. They see your brand with it because they'll see your book cover, your podcast cover image. Yep, your brand amplified. Wow, they always have such good advice. I should really check out more about them. And everything's hyperlinked. We can take them to past episodes. We can take them to your website. So you get the branding effect from the repeated exposure.
Nice. So I bet there are a lot of people listening right now who are authors or have podcasts or have creative content. How do you approve people to become part of the app?
People can go to our website, brainbumpapp.com. And on that page, at the bottom of the page, there's a link for content creators. You fill out a 30-second form, your name, contact, a little about the content, and we'll get in touch with you. And right now, we are just expanding content. We have started primarily with business content because, of course, when you're doing branding, you want to be very focused,
right?
And then you can move to a broader brand. So we started with businessy content. And as this year, we're recording in 2023, as we start to get more content in different categories, like relationships and family and health and wellness, as we start to say, okay, we've got some content here, we're going to roll out those categories as well. So people can get in touch with us. On that website, there's a 90-second video that will show you what the app does. So you can get a better sense of it. I know it can be a little hard through a podcast, but you can't really see it. And they can fill out that form and get in touch with us. And I'll note, because we're recording this in the spring of 2023, we've got a lot of new functionality coming out over the summer. For example, people have said, I love the content you have, but I wish you had more. I wish you had my book on there. And by the way, we don't put content on there without permission from the author or content creator. I know the book summary apps do. And I hear from content creators, they hate that. Say, you got my book wrong. You missed the point, because they can summarize under fair use. Like, no, you're hurting my brand because that's not what I'm doing. And also now people won't buy the book because they read that 10-minute description. So they think I don't need the book. We're designed to be a companion to your content. Mm-hmm. And we also have you do it. We're not going to take your stuff without your permission. But as we roll out these different categories, we'll expand. But people in the meantime are saying, you're not rolling out fast enough. So we're going to let the app users put their own tips in there, not under your brand. Mm-hmm. So here's the example, we have to be brand sensitive. We don't want one of your listeners saying, hey, here's what I'm getting from these podcasts and let me share it with all your other fans. Because if they get it wrong, that can hurt your brand. Right. But they can say your brand amplified, you're not yet on the app, but that's okay. I'll put the key points on the app myself for me. And so they've got a record. It's like a note-taking app. It's just sometimes we give you all the notes to make your life easier.
Yeah. And it's visual. Is there audio as well?
Right now, it is just text. We know as we expand different formats, audio clips, video, images, that's on our roadmap.
Wonderful. I love that. And I know we talked about this, I think, when you were first launching the app. And then we picked it up again last September. And then now I'm like, okay, I think I'm finally ready. I think I'm finally in a place where I have those tidbits and I've done that. So I'm really excited to explore what you're doing. I think over the last few years, a lot has shifted to apps, right? I use apps. It's funny that you said like people don't just want to open an app. Well, I use multiple apps that I open every day, whether it's the Patreon app, because I'm in a book club where we listen or read a book every month. And then the host of the book club also does an episode on every chapter to reinforce the concepts. So I'm like, oh, I love what you're doing because I can also see that being another step to continue to reinforce those concepts with me. I have another app that I open when I go to sleep for listen to subliminals while I sleep, right? I have other apps that I look at to track different things, but I'm definitely adding Brain Bump into my daily calendar of what apps I want to open and look at. So thank you for giving a good explanation to us.
You've hit upon one of the reasons we chose to do the app, because email marketing, it is getting so cluttered.
Yeah.
And there's so much in my inbox, and the inbox is no longer personal. And again, with the rise of AI, I think it's just going to get worse. But apps are a lot more personal. Apps are what we control. I only put the apps on that I want.
Yeah.
And I open it when I want. And so it's giving people that control of that pull. And in fact, if you ever build an app, so anyone in the audience thinking of building an app, remember, very careful when it comes to privacy, because I work as a cybersecurity CTO. If people are willing to share information, including, for example, location, you've got the time, you've got the location, that's already some contextual information that can help you understand why they might be using your app and what they might be looking for. Now, I will note, we talked a little, you said about using it daily, and I commented earlier about, having to open the app every day. We take a very different philosophy from social media. We are not social media. Social media, their metric is how long people are on the app.
Right.
They want to suck people on and they want you to just keep scrolling. I see that as a tax. Now, it might be one people subconsciously are willing to pay, but this is why the design of Brain Bump is to not keep you on the app. It's for you to go in, get what you need, and leave.
Wow.
When you say the tip is all I need, or you say, you know what, that's a good tip, I want to go further. So you click through to listen to the episode or read the blog post, but that's it. We don't want to keep you on because then it will feel like we're another tax and we're a productivity tool, not a tax.
Yeah. Oh, I'm really excited. And you are such a calming presence, I just have to say. My ADD brain is like slowing down a little bit in this conversation and just really being able to be present and in the moment and loving it. So thank you for doing that for me, Mark. So that is a lot about the future of media. Some of the other things that I've been seeing in interviews or conference discussions I've heard recently are podcasts are new media that everybody's going to. Huge major brands are starting to use podcasts, not just having their executives on podcasts as guests, but starting their own as their next form of branding and marketing their companies because they've realized all of this other stuff is happening. We've seen the media landscape change with PR and journalists where BuzzFeed, laid off all of their news staff, but the branded content staff is still there because I immediately texted a friend of mine who works on the branded content side. She's like, no, we're all safe on this side because it's paid advertising essentially, right? But we're seeing AI also slightly take over some of the easier stories for media. And I'm hearing from other, people Washington Post or Fortune, who are also looking at, they're like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to have my job as a straight journalist. They're thinking about moving me into branded content. So we're seeing so much shifting where a lot of media now, essentially, they want the publicists or our clients to write the articles and submit them, right? They're kind of taking some of that away from the journalistic integrity, I guess you could say. So we've seen that. I've also hear people who are now using video SEO who've completely moved out of the written SEO game and just into video. So there's so many things changing. And I think a lot of this does have to do with the AI. But what are some other trends that you're seeing? Or do you have some reactions to some of the things I've been throwing at you?
I'll note these are not new trends, but they are gaining. For example, AI written articles go back almost 20 years. Now, 20 years ago, all AI could do was cover some basic, standard, well-formatted types of articles. The classic examples are weather reports. The weather article, what will the weather be like? It's 4 paragraphs. It's just saying rain, humidity, a few basics. And so AI could say, I'm just going to pull in what's the feed. It's going to be sunny in the morning, cloudy afternoon, chance of rain, and could put it into a fairly standard template. So we started to see around the edges, AI was starting to nibble away at some of this. Now, of course, with the large language models, it's accelerating and it's going to be a lot more. You're right that there is a shift. Video, we know video, especially with younger generations, with Gen Z, they seem like a video first type of generation. Millennials are, I think, leaning video. I don't know if they're quite video first. They grew up in a text world, but they liked video.
Yeah.
Podcasts, as you note, are great. And podcasts, of course, we see them not just for external. I'm seeing more and more internal podcasts, whether it's an organization, a company itself, or maybe some association. They're using podcasts internally for their members to communicate. But one thing I'll note with all of this, and this goes to, again, how I'm looking at the future of media, is we have to shift to nonlinear formats. We have to pull out all the relevant information from this start to finish. So again, to use my book and app as an example, and we'll talk about how it applies elsewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I've got the networking tips in chapter 7. And I say at the start of the book, you don't have to read this book start to finish. If you buy my book, you say, hey, I got to learn networking quick, jump to chapter 7. You can skip 1 through 6. And of course, you can grab the tips when you need it through the app. So you don't have to say, oh, I have to read 200 pages to get this little bit that's the most valuable to me.
Nice.
There's a reason, by the way, books are written to be way too many pages, most of them. They all feel like they're about 100, 150 pages too long. There's a historical reason for that. But wouldn't it be great if you could just get the 40 pages that was relevant?
Yeah.
Or here's an hour-long talk, but I really need that 20 minutes kind of in the middle there. And so what we need is better indexing. We're starting to see these tools, YouTube's starting to roll it out on others, indexing into the content or being able to chop up the content so people can jump to the middle, can jump to the part they need. Long form content is great. I'm a fan of it. Obviously, I've written a book. I go on podcasts, but people need to grab snippets of it that's most relevant where they are, because especially with AI, there's this tsunami of content that's coming out, and we don't have time to parse through it. So you need to think of your content moving in nonlinear access so people can pull what they want when they need it.
How would you say that you use that strategy for some of the companies that you're involved with? Or have you, even though I know you're the CTO, CPO person, I'm sure you're also helping advise on the branding, marketing strategy side with all of your expertise.
Trying to think about the companies I'm involved with. Most at the current time aren't media, although one of them, it's a financial services company, but we're creating tools to let people take large sets of data and filter through to find the relevant data to their needs. Now, people have filtered data for years, and they have, so it's not that innovative, but it's the idea of people being able to say, this is my need. We say, well, given that need, here's the subset of data that's most relevant. You don't have to look at all the national data. We filtered out, this is what's relevant to you, and now you can further refine that. So if you think about all the information you have, your brand has probably put out a lot of information on your brand itself, or just the space that you're in, or it might be internally in the knowledge bases you might have, ways that you can filter and organize it. And here, by the way, this is where AI and large language models can do a lot, where they can come in, pick up your information. One thing that we talk about in the AI space, I don't think it's made it to the general populace yet, is this concept of fine tuning. So if you think, for example, about ChatGPT, it got trained on some broad data. It uses Wikipedia and some other stuff, and it knows a lot about a lot of things, but it's not deep in any one area. Now, let's suppose, for example, you're a financial services company and you have decades of information, internal papers and reports. You've got some emails where you're doing analysis, all this proprietary information where you have deep expertise. What we're going to see in the next year or two is people take these general AI models and they're going to dump in their proprietary data. Now, whether this is done handing it to the third party if you trust them, or you get some open source or some private version you bought, and you do what's known as fine tuning, where you say, well, we're going to customize it with this data. One analogy, we all went to K through 12 and we got general education, and then we each got our custom education or fine tuning in college. I got fine tuned in physics and computer science, someone else in communications. So you get that fine tuning, and now you have a database that has all that historical knowledge that you've built up over the years. And this can let you really kind of drill through, because who has time to look at 20,000 documents? Yeah. But the LLM can now basically go in and pinpoint, here's the relevant information. So I think that's going to be a coming trend in the next 1 to 2 years. And that can do a lot for how we can take our content and really customize it to specific needs and channels.
Yeah, that just reminds me of looking at some digital marketing case studies this week for my class and looking at what are the best brands and what are the best performing brands. And they were the ones that had a higher level of customizations. I think one of them was a military bank or credit union that asked the right questions to make sure, what are your goals? What are your financial goals over the next 1 to 5 years? What do you need from us the most? And then they could personalize the content to each member so that I might be getting something on, planning for my financial future and thinking about like how much money I need to put away for retirement, but somebody else might be wanting to buy a house. And so they're going to get that kind of plan and roadmap. So I'm simplifying what you're saying.
That's a great example of financial planning. Any financial planner starts out by saying, what were your goals? But we can adopt this into our specific domains. Even if you're an e-commerce company. Now, that's something where you think, well, it's very impersonal. It's very just show up to the website, select what you want, and maybe I look at what's in your cart and I'll give you some people who bought this also like that. And that's about all they do. But in fact, you can do some personalization, whether it is engaging them to answer a few questions, or it could just be you start to build up those personas. Imagine you're selling sports apparel. Okay, you can figure out, are they playing football or running? But even if you see they're buying running equipment, you can ask, what are your running goals? Are you just a casual jogger? Maybe you do this for exercise, just get out of the house. Maybe you're a marathoner, you're doing serious training, and those two people will have different needs. They'll have different buying cycles or seasonality. And so by understanding the goals, why they're engaging with your stuff, product or service, not just content, but the product or service you have, you can start to understand what are their specific needs and cycles. And instead of this, welcome to our 12-week drip campaign that everyone gets, you're in the casual runner. So here's what that looks like over a year. You're in the marathoner. So the marathoners, you might want to say, hey, New York City Marathon's coming up. We've got a special. The casual runner might not care. And so you can do better customization.
Very nice. I like that. I want to switch a little bit to talking about when you're working with startups, what are some of the mistakes that you see them make right off the bat? Because I know a lot of people who are listening have started their own companies. They might be new. They might have been in business 20 years, but they're still looking for these tips and tricks and to kind of understand what's going on in the current landscape and what are some things people need to think about as they're approaching entrepreneurship and small business ownership.
Well, that's a very long list. Because a startup company there's 1,000 ways to screw it up, but kind of only one way to do it right. Now, there's many ways to build a startup, but you have to get each thing right. If you don't get your funding right, you don't get your hiring right, you don't get your sales right, any one of those can kill you. But some of the more common things I see, some are not understanding your market. Talk to potential customers. People think, oh, well, this is going to be great. And they go to their customers who say, no, that's not really my problem. Or there's no way I'd pay that much money for it. Before I did Brain Bump, I was talking to people and saying, hey, what if I did this? Would this be useful? Is this your actual need? Tell me about your other needs. So I want to test the market. So always be talking to your customers, your potential customers. Make sure you understand their needs and even get specific. If I offered you this, would that be helpful? Focus on your customers. The other challenge I would say is there's a fine point between doing too much and too little. One side of the spectrum, you're doing everything yourself. From scheduling your own meetings, building your own website, doing your social media, building the product. It's like you can't be an expert in all of it.
Yeah.
Can't. I'm a CTO, but I am rusty on coding. I hire people to code for me because I'm not fast anymore. And my time is better used on strategy, on business development. So for my personal projects, even though it's my domain, it's not the best ROI. So understand where your ROI is best.
Nice.
You hire a virtual assistant at $20 an hour for 10 hours a week to just save you from going through a whole bunch of emails so you can focus on more important stuff.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I see people where they try to overfit a process. Here's our process for doing this and that. And they think they understand exactly how the business will operate. And they put in these processes. And then it turns out the business doesn't quite work out that way. And you have some pivots or meandering, or it's a little different, but now your processes don't align. So there's a sweet spot in the middle. I automate a lot of things, but I try not to prematurely automate and over processize. Maybe it's the right word there.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is you have to have systems, but you also have to be fluid and flexible. And you also need to make sure that you're playing to your strengths and maybe not be afraid to spend the money on hiring the right people to take over some of that other work.
Especially these days with tools like Upwork and all the people around the world who can do things at a relatively low cost. See where you can say, this is the hard part, or this is where I need to be involved, and everything else can you. And you might not have much money. I get that as an entrepreneur, but can you say the X hours a week to save me Y hours? That's probably going to be worth it for some combination of X and Y that will shift over time.
Nice. Well, this has been a very robust conversation. And I know I am going to bring you back on to talk about career planning, your book, The Career Toolkit. I think there's so much more that we need to get into that it really deserves its own episode. Is there anything that we didn't hit on that you'd like to talk about with the future of media, Brain Bump?
I'll just offer some websites and information if you want to go further. I'm going to give you two websites. The first is my Cognosco Media website. Throw in my book, the Career Toolkit book.com website, but we're going to talk about that on another show. But Cognosco Media, COGNOSCO media.com. And on there, I have a blog. It's a little thin. I don't post as often as I do to my other blog. But on that blog, I do talk about the future of media. I talk about how content is evolving. And so if you're interested in learning more about some of these topics, you can explore that in the blog. I also have author resources for upcoming authors. There's nothing to buy on the website. I'm not selling anything there. So feel free to check that stuff out. And then those interested in learning more about the app, if you go to brainbumpapp.com. And by the way, here's an interesting challenge I had, a branding challenge. Apple screwed up how they list the name on their app platform. I don't know why. I checked, we put in correctly. So if you search for Brain Space Bump on Android, on the Android store, you'll find it, Google Play.
Okay.
But on Apple, some people see it, some people don't.
Wow.
For a year, they've been saying, oh, our engineers are looking into it. I think they're stonewalling me. So this was a problem because normally I'd say, oh, go find the Brain Bump app. That didn't work. So I had to create a different brand, a different URL, brainbumpapp.com, where I could send everyone. And if you go to that page, the first thing you see at the top is, here are links to the store. So if you're on your phone, you click the link. If you're on your screen, if you're on your laptop, well, we've got QR codes. You can snap it with your phone.
Nice.
And this way I can send everyone to a simple, easy to remember site instead of saying, well, do this if you're Apple, do this if you're Android. So brainbumpapp.com. And that's where you can go see more about the app, follow those links to the store. And if you're a content creator, you can go down to the bottom of the page and fill out that 30-second form, and we'll be in touch with you.
Fantastic. And I will make sure to put all of your websites in our show notes as well, so that if somebody wants to just click through, they can do that as well. If they don't want to remember them from the episode, aren't in a place where they can write down the names. Mark, do you have a quote, mantra, poem, verse, some words of wisdom that you live by?
I would say probably the number one comes from one of my favorite movies, Strictly Ballroom. A life lived in fear is a life half lived.
Oh, I love that. Wonderful.
Go out and take risks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. Really enjoyed our conversation and all of the knowledge you dropped. Thank you to our audience for listening to another amazing expert. Again, I'll have all of his links in the show notes. I highly recommend that you check out the resources, download the Brain Bump app. And if you are a creator and you want to get your book, your podcast, as something else into the app, make sure to fill out that process. It's not a long process, and you'll be sharing your content with a lot more people who otherwise wouldn't have access to it. With that, I'll be back again in a few days with another amazing expert. Until then, have a great week. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.